dust, dead plants, and a rather awkward reunion. Chapter 1. The box that smelled like regret. I have a theory about family homes. The moment you decide to sell one, every single drawer, cupboard, and forgotten corner conspires against you. It's as if the house itself goes, "Oh, you're leaving? Let me show you 47 years of accumulated life choices." My name is Daniel Finch, I'm 43 years old. I once genuinely believed I could sell my father's house in a weekend. And I am currently sitting cross-legged on the floor of his attic, wearing a paper crown that I found in a 1987 Christmas cracker. Dad passed in March. Peacefully, in his armchair, with a cup of tea going cold beside him. Which is honestly the most him thing he could have done. He'd been ill for a while, so we had time to brace ourselves. But nothing really braces you for the smell of someone else's attic. It's a unique combination of old wood, damp newspaper, and something I can only describe as the concept of the 1970s. My sister, Patricia, had volunteered to come help, but then, and I want to be fair here, she remembered that her dog had a thing, on the specific weekend I needed her. The dog in question is a 12-year-old spaniel who hasn't had a thing since 2019. So here I am. Alone. In a paper crown. I'd been at it for 3 hours when I found the box. It was wedged behind an old chest of drawers, the kind with the sticky drawer that every house in Britain, and probably North America, had at some point. The box was a battered old biscuit tin. Crawford's assorted, if you're wondering. And inside it were a few photographs, a medal I didn't recognize, and an envelope. The envelope was unsealed. The paper inside was cream-colored and brittle at the edges, folded into thirds, and written in my father's handwriting. But younger. Rounder. Less certain of itself. On the outside, in that same younger hand, was written, "For Elspeth." And then, below it, in a different ink, clearly added later, "Do not send. Do not send. Do not send." 3 times. He'd written it 3 times. Now, I want to be clear. I am not a nosy person. I am a man of discretion and considerable personal restraint. I once found my neighbor's diary on a park bench, and handed it straight in without reading a single page. I am practically a saint. I read the letter in about 30 seconds flat. It was dated June 1971, written from somewhere in Northern Ireland during Dad's National Service posting. It was addressed to someone named Elspeth Cairns, and it was, I don't quite know how to put this, absolutely lovely. Funny and warm and full of terrible jokes about army food, and then, near the end, it said something that made me sit very still in the attic for a long time. It said, "I heard from Archie that you decided to keep the baby. I think about her every single day, and I understand if you never want to hear from me again. I only hope she has your laugh and your stubbornness, and that you are both well." I took off the paper crown. This felt like a paper crown off moment. "Dad," I said to no one in particular. "What on earth?" Chapter 2. I Google how to find a half-sister and regret it immediately. There's a particular kind of madness that sets in when you discover a family secret in an attic. It doesn't make you want to sit down and calmly process the information. It makes you want to immediately solve it, as if it's a puzzle you found at a car boot sale, and you're worried someone else will come along and claim it. I drove home with the letter on the passenger seat like a small unexploded bomb, and by 9 o'clock that night, I was on my 3rd cup of tea and had filled an entire notebook with what I was generously calling research. What I'd found out. Elspeth Cairns was a real name that real people had. That was, genuinely, the extent of my findings. My wife, Helen, appeared in the kitchen doorway in her dressing gown, looked at me, looked at the notebook, looked at the letter in its plastic sandwich bag. I decided it needed protecting, for archival purposes, and said, "Daniel, it's 10:30. Dad had another child," I said. There was a pause. Helen is a very composed person. She teaches secondary school geography, which means she has developed an almost supernatural ability to remain calm in the face of unexpected information. She crossed the kitchen, sat down opposite me, picked up the letter very carefully, and read it. She said. I said. That's all you've got? I'm processing, she said. Give me a moment. She put the letter down. Right. So your father may have had a child before he met your mother. The mother chose to raise her alone, and he apparently never followed up. And you found a letter he never sent. Yes. And you want to find her. Don't you think I should? Helen looked at me with the expression she usually reserves for students who've handed in homework that is technically an essay but spiritually a cry for help. I think, she said carefully, that you should perhaps not Google things at 10:30 at night and instead sleep on it. I did not sleep on it. I Googled things at 10:30 at night. By midnight I had the phone number of a genealogy research service, a Reddit thread about people who discovered half-siblings, which was genuinely heartwarming but also sent me down a 40-minute rabbit hole about a man in Ohio who found 11 half-brothers, and a very detailed Wikipedia article about illegitimacy laws in 1970s Britain, that I read in its entirety for reasons I cannot fully explain. I also had, rather unexpectedly, a name. Elspeth Cairns. I found her through a combination of old electoral rolls that a genealogy website had digitized, and a local newspaper archive from a town in Scotland called Kinlochleven. She'd been mentioned in a 1969 article about a village fete. She'd won the Victoria Sponge competition. Helen, I said, coming to the bedroom door. I found her. Well, I found the mother. The woman Dad wrote to. Helen put down her book. Is she alive? I don't know yet. But I know she was a very good baker. Helen looked at me for a long moment. Go to sleep, Daniel. I went to sleep. But I dreamed about Victoria Sponge and a woman with my father's eyes. Chapter 3. Scotland, where everything is scenic, and nothing is convenient. I'd like to tell you that finding a long-lost half-sister is a graceful, dignified process. I'd like to tell you that. What actually happened is that I drove 8 hours to a small town in the Scottish Highlands in a hire car, with a sat-nav that kept pronouncing Kinlochleven as if it were a respiratory illness. And I arrived at the address I'd found. A white cottage with a green door and an extraordinary garden. Only to stand at the gate for 10 minutes trying to work out what on earth I was going to say. Excuse me, did your mother know a man called Geoffrey Finch in 1971? And if so, are you the result? Too blunt. Hello, I've driven from Yorkshire with a letter from my dead father, because I may be your half-brother, and I'm already regretting everything about this. Also too blunt, but more accurate. The decision was made for me when the green door opened and a woman appeared. She was about my age, possibly a year or two older, with short graying hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, carrying a trowel in one hand, and what appeared to be a container of plant food in the other. She looked at me standing at her gate with the expression of someone who's used to tourists getting lost. Can I help you? She said. Possibly, I said. Is your name, by any chance, Margaret Cairns? Or Margaret something else, if you've married? She narrowed her eyes. It's Margaret Drummond. Cairns is my maiden name. A pause. Who are you? And here's the thing about that moment. I'd rehearsed it. I'd rehearsed it in the car for 8 hours. I had a whole speech prepared. It was measured and considerate, and it acknowledged the sensitivity of the situation, and gave her plenty of space to process and respond at her own pace. What I said was, "I think my dad might be your dad. I've got a letter. Sorry." There was a silence that lasted approximately one geological epoch. Margaret Drummond looked at me very steadily. Then she looked at the trowel in her hand. Then she looked back at me. "You'd better come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." Which is, I have to say, the correct response to nearly everything. Margaret's kitchen was warm and cluttered, and smelled of coffee and something baking. There was a cat on the windowsill who regarded me with profound skepticism. There were children's drawings pinned to a corkboard. Grandchildren, it turned out. And a framed photograph on the wall of a woman who looked about 70 and was beaming into the camera outside what appeared to be a cheese shop. "Is that your mother?" I asked. "That's Elspeth, yes." Margaret set 2 mugs down on the table. "She passed 6 years ago. 91 years old and sharp as a tack until the end." She sat down. "Now, show me this letter." I laid it on the table, still in its sandwich bag. Margaret pulled on her reading glasses and read it very slowly, twice. I watched her face, which did a lot of interesting things and gave very little away. "Geoffrey Finch," she said at last. "He died in March," I said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know him." She said it without bitterness, just as a fact. "Mum raised me on her own until she married Duncan. I was 4 by then. She told me when I was 12 that my birth father had been a young man, doing his national service, that things hadn't worked out between them, and that she decided to keep me regardless." She looked up at me. She didn't tell me his name. She said she didn't want me chasing after someone who might not want to be found. A pause. "She did keep one thing, though." "Oh?" Margaret got up and left the room. I sat very still and the cat on the windowsill judged me comprehensively. When Margaret came back, she was holding a small photograph, black and white, slightly creased at one corner. A young man in uniform, squinting into the sun, grinning at the camera with an expression I recognized immediately, because I'd seen it in the mirror every day of my life. "Mum never said who it was," Margaret said. "Just that she'd kept it because she thought I might want it one day." She set it down on the table between us. "I always wondered." I stared at the photograph. 20-year-old Dad. Grinning his grin. "That's him," I said. "That's absolutely him." "I thought it might be." Margaret sat back down. "Or maybe he was 20 years old and frightened and didn't know what to do." She looked at me across the table. "How old are you?" 43. "I'm 45. She said it with a slightly raised eyebrow, and I appreciated that she let me do the maths. "He married my mum in 1973, I said. "Well then." Margaret wrapped both hands around her mug. "I suppose we're half siblings." "I suppose we are." I paused. "For what it's worth, our dad made very good scrambled eggs." Margaret looked at me for a moment. And then, to my enormous relief, she laughed. Chapter 4. In which my sister Patricia has opinions. I called Patricia from the car park of a very nice pub in Kinlochleven, where Margaret had insisted on buying me dinner. The signal was predictably unreliable, which meant the conversation had the quality of a radio play transmitted from the moon. "You found what?" Patricia said. "A half-sister. Her name is Margaret. She's lovely. She has 3 grown-up children and 2 grandchildren and she makes her own jam." Dan. Back up. Dad had, before he met Mum, yes. Elspeth raised her alone. She never told Margaret who her father was. She lives in Scotland. She has a cat who doesn't like me. Silence. Then. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm, I'm in a car park. There's a difference. Daniel. Patricia's voice had shifted into the tone she used when she was genuinely rattled, which was actually quite rare and which I found oddly touching. Does this mean Dad? Does this mean Mum didn't know? I said. At least, I don't think so. It was before they met, Trish. He was 20 years old. People were different then about these things. I paused. Or possibly the same, but with less access to the internet. Another silence. I could hear Patricia's dog barking in the background, which meant she was probably pacing, which was what she did when she was thinking hard. I want to meet her, Patricia said. I thought you would. I'm coming to Scotland. You hate Scotland. I don't hate Scotland, I hate midges. Those are different things. A pause. Does she? Does Margaret? Does she want to meet us? Both of us? I asked. I said. She said, and I'm quoting directly. Tell your sister to come up whenever she likes, but to bring decent biscuits because the shops here are a 40-minute round trip and I'm not going specially. Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Probably both. I like her already. I thought you would. Patricia came up the following weekend, bringing what can only be described as an unreasonable quantity of biscuits. 3 different tins, plus a packet of those fancy chocolate ones that come in individual wrappers as if they're meant to be rationed. She also brought her husband, Colin, who is one of those people who is immediately comfortable in any situation, and who, within 15 minutes of arriving at Margaret's cottage, was in the garden helping with the raised beds as if they'd known each other for years. Margaret, for her part, seemed genuinely entertained by all of us. She had the air of someone who'd processed her curiosity about her birth family over decades, and arrived at a place of settled peace about it. Which made me feel slightly embarrassed about how frantically I'd been Googling things at midnight. Did you always wonder? Patricia asked her, over tea and the good chocolate biscuits. About father. Margaret considered this. Sometimes. Less than you might think. Mum was wonderful. Dad. My dad, Duncan. He was wonderful too. He died when I was 30, but I still miss him every day. She smiled. But yes. I wondered. Especially when I was pregnant with my first. You start thinking about genes. About what you might be passing on. Dad had a gift for losing his car keys. I offered. Very heritable trait in our family. Margaret pointed at a small dish by the kitchen door containing, I now noticed, an impressive collection of keys. I have 7 sets of spares for everything, she said. I always assumed it was just me. Patricia looked at me. I looked at Patricia. We both looked at Margaret. Oh no, said Patricia. It's Dad. It's absolutely Dad. Which was, honestly, one of the nicest things. Finding him in someone we hadn't known existed. Finding the little echoes. Margaret had his habit of laughing before the punchline of a joke, of holding her mug with both hands, of going very quiet when she was thinking something through. Small things, the kind of things you don't notice until you're looking for them, and then suddenly they're everywhere. We stayed for the whole weekend. Colin fixed Margaret's garden gate, which had been sticking. Patricia and Margaret spent approximately 4 hours talking about their respective children and grandchildren, exchanging photographs on their phones with the intensity of people doing a very important business transaction. I sat on the garden wall with a cup of tea and the cat, who had by this point decided I was tolerable, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't known was unsettled. Chapter 5. The letter gets where it was going. On the Sunday morning before we drove back south, Margaret found me in the kitchen, washing up the breakfast things, and set a small envelope on the counter beside me. "For you," she said. "To take back." Inside was a photograph. A copy she'd had made at the village post office the day before, she explained, because she wasn't giving up the original. The young man in uniform, squinting into the sun, grinning that grin. "He should be with you," she said. "You knew him." "I only ever wondered about him." "Margaret," I started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "I had Mum. I had Duncan. I had a good life and a full one, and I'm not in the business of grieving things I never lost." She picked up a tea towel and started drying. "But I'm glad you came. I'm glad, I know." "She doesn't sound angry," I said. "Elspeth. From what you've described." "No," said Margaret. "That was Mum. Very practical. She always said that regret was a waste of energy you needed for better things. She made her choice. To keep me, to raise me on her own. And she never second-guessed it, as far as I could tell. She had her friends and her garden and her baking, and Duncan eventually, and she was genuinely happy." A pause. "I hope your dad was too." "He was," I said. "Not without his sorrows, like anyone. But yes. I think so." "Good." Margaret folded the letter back into its envelope. Then they both did all right. I did not cry. I want to be very clear about this. I had something in my eye. It was a very dusty kitchen. There was absolutely no crying. I cried a little bit. It was fine. Margaret patted my arm and said, "Oh, honestly, pull yourself together." In such a kind way that it made it worse. And then we were both laughing and it was fine. We drove back on Sunday afternoon. Patricia slept in the passenger seat for most of it, which is her traditional response to emotional weekends. Colin drove. He'd volunteered and I wasn't about to argue. And I sat in the back with Dad's letter, and the photograph in a proper archive envelope that Margaret had produced from somewhere, with the air of someone who had been organizing important documents her whole life. I thought about Dad. About him at 20, grinning into the sun in that photograph, writing that letter and then writing, "Do not send," 3 times, as if once wasn't convincing enough. About him carrying that for the rest of his life. Not heavily, I didn't think, but there. A small closed room in him that he decided not to open. I thought about how I'd always assumed I knew him. And how, it turned out, you never quite finish knowing someone, even after they're gone. Especially after they're gone. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Your sister left her good rain jacket. I'll post it. Also, Colin left his glasses in the garden. These are also being posted. Please tell them to be more organized." I showed it to Colin in the rearview mirror. He laughed. Patricia, apparently not as asleep as I'd thought, said, "I knew I liked her." I texted back, "Sorry about them both. Same time next month?" 3 dots. Then, "I'll make sure there are biscuits." The letter and the photograph sat in their envelope on the seat beside me. One unsent, one kept in silence for 50 years. 2 small things that had waited a long time to end up in the same place. You might say it was sentimental. You might say it was the sort of thing that only happens in stories. But the thing about family is that it's always a story in progress. You think you know the ending, and then someone finds an old biscuit tin in an attic, and it turns out there are chapters you hadn't read yet. Dad, to put it in terms he would have appreciated. "You daft old man. She's wonderful." I think he would have known that. I think part of him always did.